There's a photograph that exists in some form in a lot of families. The eldest son, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing slightly apart from the younger ones. And if you look closely at his face, there's something there that doesn't belong on a child that age. Not sadness exactly, something more like posture, a kind of held together seriousness. He is standing the way someone stands when they have been told, in 100 small ways, that people are watching and counting on him. He looks, in a quiet and almost invisible way, like a small adult who has not been informed that he is still allowed to be small. Most families would look at that boy and feel proud, so responsible, so mature, such a good big brother. What almost nobody sees is that they are looking at a childhood being quietly traded away, and that the boy in that photo will be paying for that trade for the next 40 years. To understand him, you have to understand what was actually handed to him, and when. It usually starts before he can remember. The eldest son is, very often, not raised so much as deployed. A younger sibling arrives, and overnight he is no longer simply a child in the family. He is the big brother, and that phrase, said warmly, is actually a job description. Watch them. Set the example. Don't make it harder for your mother. Be patient, because you're the oldest. In many families, especially ones under financial strain or short of one parent, it goes further still. He becomes the little man of the house, the translator, the second adult, the one whose own needs quietly move to the back of the line, because there is a line now, and he has been told that a good oldest son lets others go first. And here is the part that matters. Nobody ever sat him down and asked if he wanted the job. There was no conversation. The role simply arrived, wrapped in praise. And praise is a very effective way to hand someone a burden because it makes the burden feel like an identity. He didn't experience it as pressure. He experienced it as who he was, the responsible one. And a child will carry almost anything, indefinitely, if he believes it's not a weight but a self. So he learns the central rule of his childhood early. My value comes from what I hold up. Not from being delightful. Not from being a kid. From being reliable. From being the one others lean on and the one who never, himself, leans. This does something specific to a developing person. Childhood is supposed to contain a particular kind of freedom. The freedom to be unimpressive. To fall apart and be caught. To need things loudly without calculating the cost. To make a mess and have an adult absorb it. That freedom is not a luxury. It's how a person learns, in their body, that they are loved for existing and not for performing. The eldest son, who was never allowed to be a child, often missed exactly that. He was needed too early and too constantly to ever fully relax into being cared for. He was always, even at 8, partly on duty, and the boy on duty becomes a very particular kind of man. He becomes capable, strikingly so. He's the one who handles things, the one the family still calls in a crisis. The dependable one at work, the steady one among his friends, the partner who manages, fixes, provides, carries. From the outside, it looks like strength, and in many ways it genuinely is. But underneath the competence, there is often a man who does not actually know how to be taken care of, who experiences his own needs as a kind of imposition, an inconvenience he should be able to handle privately, who finds it almost physically difficult to receive help, to be weak in front of someone, to be the one held instead of the one holding. He was never shown how. The role never had a scene for it. And there's a loneliness in that which is hard for him to even name, because he is surrounded by people who rely on him, and being relied upon can look, from a distance, exactly like being loved. But they are not the same thing. To be relied upon is to be valued for your function. To be loved is to be wanted even when you are functioning at nothing. A lot of eldest sons quietly suspect, in a place they don't examine often, that if they ever fully stopped achieving, stopped providing, stopped holding it together, they would find out that the people around them were attached to the holding, and not to him. So he never stops long enough to find out. He just keeps carrying and calls the exhaustion responsibility. There's often anger in there too, though it rarely gets to come out cleanly. A low, buried resentment at a sibling who got to be softer, got to be rescued, got to be a child. At parents who needed him to grow up at a speed no child should be asked to. And because he was raised to never make it harder for anyone, that anger has nowhere acceptable to go. So it turns inward and becomes a harsh inner voice that calls him weak the moment he wants to rest. Or it leaks out sideways, as control, as a short temper over small things, as a difficulty ever simply letting go. Now, here is what this man most needs to hear, and it is not that he should stop being responsible. His responsibility is real and a genuine strength, and the people he carries are genuinely better for it. The goal was never to dismantle that. The goal is something he was simply never offered. The understanding that being dependable was a role he was assigned, not the whole of who he is, and not the price of his place in the world. He is allowed to separate the two. He is allowed to be the capable one, and a person who has needs, who gets tired, who is sometimes scared, who is permitted to be held without first earning it through usefulness. The work of his adult life is to find the few people and the few places where he can finally set the weight down, not forever, just long enough to feel what he is when he isn't holding anything, to discover that he does not have to be useful to be wanted, to let someone take care of him and to sit with how unbearable and how healing that feels at the same time. To grieve, honestly, the childhood that quietly got spent on everyone else, not with bitterness, but so that the grief stops running him from underground. The eldest son, who was never allowed to be a child, grew into a man the whole family leans on. And the most important thing he will ever learn is that the small boy in that photograph, the one standing apart, holding himself together, on duty before he could read, was never put here only to carry the others. He was always allowed to be one of the children, too. Someone just forgot to tell him, and it is not too late for him to finally hear it.